program. We are having so much fun. It's so sad that we have to be winding down at this moment, but we're happy that we're here. With me, I have the beautiful Olivia Rotaro and the handsome Nish Chaya. We will be definitely doing a presentation today. But however, Olivia, how have you been? I haven't seen you since.
A while. Hi. Yeah, I've been doing well. I just started my first job actually. I'm in the classroom with my students first time, so it's been a crazy week, but it's been everything I've ever hoped for. So I'm super blessed. Yeah, Ignatia.
I've actually been really good, I mean, the first couple of months of quarantine, it's almost like you're excited. You get to take a break from school. Get to take a break from just your regular schedule. It's almost like you just get to sit home, watch movies, do whatever, just chill and just have a more relaxed schedule at school. But then as the summer came on and as days go on, it starts to drag and drag and drag, and it can wear on you a bit. So yeah, I mean, once it came around to the holiday time, it was interesting. It was actually a different type of Christmas that I'm used to, because usually, I'm sorry. Usually, when I'm, during the Christmas time, we either travel to see our cousins or family friends, and we usually have like a lot of people around us. But this time, during the Christmas time, for the first time, I won't say the first time, but it was just interesting because we were just more in a closed environment. Couldn't really invite anyone. Couldn't really have anyone over for like Christmas dinner or anything. It was more of us just spending time as a family, getting closer. It was good.
Awesome, awesome. So as we begin, we just kind of bow our heads for prayer, ask the Lord to join us at this moment. Loving God and friend, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to speak with our friends here. I pray that you lead out the proceedings of the rest of this program. And bless us, oh God, we pray. In your son's name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So with us, we have our clinical counselor. Her name is Nina Lim. Hi, Nina. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine. So we just want to, so we're going to do a presentation, right? You have a presentation ready for us that is going to help us how to navigate ourselves through the pandemic. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. I am,
right.
Yes.
Perfect. So we just want to just ask you a quick question. It might just be random, but do you have pets?
I don't. My parents have a dog, so I guess it's a family pet, but I personally don't.
Mm-hmm. So we guess that you grew up with, what kind of pet is this?
A dog.
Yeah, you have a dog. Okay, very awesome. What's the name? He or she?
His name is Enoch.
His name is Enoch. Awesome, awesome. So at this point, we do have some questions for you and stuff, but definitely you need to go into your presentation first, correct? Mm-hmm. So for those who were watching, definitely Nina is a registered clinical counselor in British Columbia. She works both with youth and adults to support them in their emotional well-beings. She's very passionate and about mental wellness, especially in the church. Outside of her counseling world, she enjoys hiking in the mountains in the beautiful British Columbia.
Perfect. And now we would love to hear your presentation and go into that. Share with us. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen. I have a bit of a PowerPoint for you guys. Okay, can you all see that? Okay. So I was asked to talk a little bit about COVID and mental health, and I think more than anything right now, therapists have been busier than ever before because it's taken such a huge toll on all of us. I just pulled this up from Statistics Canada, Stats Canada, and they did like this informal survey of, I think it was about 46,000 Canadians. So they sampled them about their mental health, and about 24% of Canadians reported poor mental health. And that number in itself, we don't really know what it means without context. So in 2018, so 2 years prior to the pandemic, that sample was about 8%. So we see like a huge increase. And then 52% of participants said that their mental health was either somewhat worse or much worse during the pandemic. And this survey was done between April and May of last year. 88% of participants experienced at least one symptom of anxiety in the 2 weeks prior to the survey. So in like the March, I guess right at the start of the pandemic, in the March month. Feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge was the most common symptom. So about 71%, becoming easily annoyed or irritable, 69%, and having trouble relaxing, about 64%. And this is just like one of or some of the ways that the pandemic has influenced our mental health. And I think we all kind of know anecdotally that it has been hard. So I think part of the question is, why? Why has the pandemic been so hard? What is it about it? And why are so many people struggling when it comes to COVID? If we're not sick, what is going on? So I'm going to give you like just a couple of what I think are some of the reasons, and it's not an exhaustive list, but just some of the reasons why I think that our mental health has been really, really struggling during the pandemic. And then at the end, I'll give you some practical kind of resources and things you can do to help you cope. So I think one of the most important things is that COVID really warps our understanding of safety. So everyone, from when we're a child, we learn about safety, whether that's physical safety, emotional safety. We learn about what is safe and unsafe in the world, right? So when we start to run across the street and there's a car that's just like driving towards us, our parents yell, stop. We start to learn like, oh, okay, it's dangerous to get in front of a moving vehicle. We start to learn about the importance of not talking to strangers and all these things. And so we have this whole network of ideas in our mind about what is safe. And COVID comes in and completely changes all of that. So people who we trust and who we love, who are safe people, are actually not considered safe anymore because of the isolation and all these things. We can't actually be with people who are not in our household. So it really warps our understanding of safety. So people who we thought were safe are actually not safe. And it has nothing to do with if they're a stranger or not, or if they've committed any crimes or not. And I think that's a huge one because safety is so important for our mental health. So I want to show you this, this diagram. So in our nervous system, we have the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So they're kind of like the gas and the brake in the car. So the sympathetic nervous system, it's responsible for our fight or flight. So it's responsible, it kicks in when there's a danger, when something's happening and we need to respond really quickly. So it just like moves blood to our extremities or to our muscles, it moves blood to our heart, and it just like everything goes much faster. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system, that's engaged when it's time for us to rest and relax. And we have these two systems in our body that are like the like I said, the gas and the brake, and they kind of go back and forth. And someone who is really balanced and healthy will have like this kind of balance coming on here and there. What happens is with COVID, because it's such a danger to our well-being and our safety, it's like the parasympathetic nervous system has been on and it hasn't turned off. Sorry, the sympathetic nervous system is on and it hasn't turned off for all these months that we've had COVID. And so as a result, it's like always being in danger and never being able to rest. And so we see the consequences of that in our mental health. So the other thing is that COVID is actually quite a traumatic experience for all of humanity, whether we've actually gotten COVID, whether we know somebody with COVID, whether we know somebody who's died from COVID. It's traumatic because if you look at trauma is not just like something that we think, oh, this is a big deal and it's scary. it's actually not about the event. It's about how our body responds to the event. So trauma is an event that overwhelms the central nervous system and changes the way you remember and react to things that remind you of it. So any event or anything that takes place that actually overwhelms our nervous system, that is considered traumatic. So I remember when the pandemic first started back in March, I remember being at home and everything had moved to online. And I remember thinking like, wow, I have no idea how long this is going to go on for. I have no idea how I'm going to do my job remotely. I have no idea if like this is going to be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And it's like this level of uncertainty that it almost felt like I could imagine what it might have felt like to live during World War II, at the beginning of World War II or World War One, when you know that there's things happening and you just don't know when it's going to end and you don't know how bad it's going to get. So when you think about that, COVID has actually been really traumatic for a lot of people. Now, not everybody has responded the same way, but it's definitely something that's overwhelmed our nervous system. I think the other thing that's really obvious is COVID has been really hard because there's been a lot less social support. And we need social support. We need human beings and other people to actually have a healthy, well balanced life. Um, these are just some of the things that I pulled together of, you know, God has created us to be social beings. He's created us to be relational, and it's so much harder when it is not in person. Not saying that it's impossible, but it's much more difficult to maintain relationships with people that are close and connected. Um, One of the things that I think was really interesting is there was a study that actually found that in World War II, the unit of survival in concentration camps was actually two people. So if there were two people together in a concentration camp and they were closely connected and bonded, their likelihood of actually surviving the concentration camp was much higher than if a person was there by themselves. And that just goes to show how much we need other people, especially in times of stress and in times of crisis. So, COVID and the pandemic and having to be isolated, that kind of just stirs on the things that are going on, or mental health issues in general. Healthy relationships are strong predictors of happiness, resilience to stress and trauma, emotion regulation, and it makes us have a lower susceptibility to anxiety and depression. So all things that we would need the most during a crisis. I think the other thing is that being alone, for a lot of people, people who are single, people who live alone, this kind of accentuates mental health issues even more because we become way more isolated. It's much harder to actually see people. It's harder to actually touch people, hug people, be in the same room as other people. And that just makes things all the more difficult. I think the other thing is that we spend so much of our day distracting ourselves from our own stuff, what's going on inside of us. And this is why I find that with most of my clients, the most difficult times for them are at night, when everything is quiet, when they're by themselves and they can't run away from their thoughts, they can't run away from their emotions, they're not distracting themselves, and it starts to become overwhelming. Well, imagine that, but amplified throughout the day. Then we're going to see a lot more issues coming up. And again, in Genesis, God said, "It is not good that man should be alone." Literally, he's saying that it is not healthy for us to be alone. And in so many ways, the pandemic has shaped us, or has warranted this kind of weird scenario where we're so isolated. And this is different for different people. For people who live alone, this is way more than people who, live in a big family, or people who are not social distancing and things like that. And I think finally, one thing that is so, so hard about the pandemic is the uncertainty of it, right? Everybody wants to know. All the news headlines want to be able to give you an expert that says when the pandemic will be over or when things will go back to normal. That's like the clickbait ad or title to actually put on news articles, because everybody wants to know, when is this going to be over? But even though people can make predictions, people can say what they think, nobody really knows how long this is going to go on for and what the fallout is going to be after all of it. And we also don't know what other things 2021 is going to bring. So this uncertainty, it also adds to this kind of lack of safety that we feel, because it's like, well, it doesn't feel so great now, and who knows what else is going to happen. So it just all kind of comes together in this like messy mess of a pool of stuff put together of why the pandemic is so difficult for so many of us. So how do we cope? What can we do? How do we deal with all of this? So in order to answer that question, I'm going to give just like a broad kind of big picture understanding, and then some practical things that we can do. So Genesis, go right back to the very beginning. Genesis chapter 1, God creates the earth and all its inhabitants. God creates Adam and Eve, and he brings them together in Genesis chapter 2. And then Genesis chapter 3, we have the fall of man. So there's something significant that happens in that chapter. And in that chapter, 3 relationships are broken, but actually 4, but I focus on the first 3. In the first relationship that's broken is our relationship with ourselves. And what I mean by that is when sin comes into the picture, we start to have an imbalanced view of who we are. We either go to the one extreme of seeing ourselves as completely horrible and unworthy, and like the scum of the earth, to like thinking too highly of ourselves. So thinking too low of ourselves or thinking too high of ourselves, not really understanding that we're made in the image of God. The second thing is we have a broken relationship with God as a result of sin. So when it comes to our perception of God and who he is and what he's like and how he treats us, how he thinks about us, it becomes warped with sin, because it becomes warped with our own misguided understandings of who God is. So we start to see God as completely, apathetic, not caring. We start to see God as completely absent. We start to see him as, vindictive, and that just warps everything. And then the other thing from the fall of man that our relationship was broken with is our relationship with other people. So we start to relate to other people in a certain way, in a broken and sinful way. We start to use other people for our own gain. We start to not think about other people. We allow tension to be there, things like that. And those are 3 relationships that God has given us to be able to actually heal us and to keep us really, really healthy. And those relationships being broken, it actually adds to this kind of emotional well-being being really broken, as well as, of course, our relationship with the environment, which I could go into, but there isn't much time for that. So the work that God is doing is the work of restoration inside of us and around us. So it says in 2 Corinthians 3:18, but we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord. So when it says the same image, remember that we are created in the image of God. So what God is doing is he's literally restoring his image inside of us. He's restoring our relationship with ourselves. He's restoring our relationship with him, and he's restoring our relationships with other people. And all of that comes together to make us really whole, healthy human beings. So the work that God is doing right now is bringing all of that together. So this is like the big picture of how do we cope. This is part of like the bigger narrative that God is actively in the work of bringing us to him, reconciling us to him, reconciling us to each other, and reconciling our own understanding of who we are. That's the big picture, right? So when it comes to the pandemic, how do we cope? It's knowing, understanding what is happening in the background and how God is moving to kind of bring us back to this perfect vision of health. What about some practical tools? Like we can understand a big picture thing, but what about the actual stuff? I'm going to give you just a whole bunch of different tools, things that you can look at, things you can try. And what I'm going to caution you is that don't think of the tools themselves as the answer, but think of them as the gateway or like the road. And that means that you can have a road, but if you don't drive your car on it to get to a place, you're not going to get very far. The road is not the answer, right? So it's not about, okay, I'll do this one thing once and it's like, great, everything is better. It's about consistency. It's about daily practice, and it's about overall. So one of the things I think is really important when it comes to our well-being, our emotional well-being and mental health and dealing with COVID is boundaries. So boundaries are actually like limits, rules, lines that we set between us and other people. You know, we use the term, you crossed the line. It literally means that you crossed my boundary. They're guidelines for what is permissible, what is okay for how people treat us and how we treat them, right? So we all have this boundary that my stuff, you should not steal from me. Like you shouldn't take it without asking. That's a boundary we have. And that's like a guideline for what is permissible between me and you. And that changes in the context and with who and blah, 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 all those things. But why are boundaries so important, especially during a pandemic? They keep us safe, and safety, especially during this time, emotional safety is so critical because of all the uncertainty that's going on around us, all the unsafety that's around us. So helping us keep a sense of safety is important. Reduces resentment, right? We need our relationships with other people more than ever before. So helping us to have healthier relationships, that's really important. It's a form of self-care, and it reduces chaos. So another boundary that is so important, especially for everyone or people who are working at home, is the boundary between home and work, right? Because it's so meshed together now, we're not literally going to an office, most of us, or we're not literally going to a place of work. We need to be able to set a boundary and distinction of, okay, this is work and this is home. I think one of the most important boundaries that God has actually given us is the Sabbath. And you never think of Sabbath as a boundary, but it really is. And it's this boundary that God puts around this entire day. He gives you, he gives us 6 days. And then on the 7th day, he puts this beautiful boundary around it saying like, no. Everything else has to stop on this day. This is the boundary. And that boundary, I was actually talking to a colleague about this. We live, especially in the Western world, we live with such a scarcity mentality, right? We have to get more. So, in the beginning of the pandemic, if everyone remembers, everybody was panicking about toilet paper, and people went and bought toilet paper. People went and bought like a whole bunch of canned goods and all this stuff, because there's the scarcity mentality of I need to get more. I need to get more, have more so I can be okay. And it comes from like this like really panicky place of rushing and trying to like conserve and trying to preserve things for yourself. Where what happens is Sabbath literally interrupts that scarcity mentality. And it says like, I am enough and I have enough. I don't need to work to get any more. I don't need to scramble for anything. Right here, right now, I have enough and I am enough. And that's literally what Sabbath does for us. Important habits, other self-care and other tips for taking care of ourselves. They're just basic, important habits that we really need to incorporate in our lives in order just to be healthier, whether it's a pandemic or not. Quality sleep, nutrition, drinking water. And this doesn't include coffee, tea, juice, anything like that, like actually drinking like clean water. Sabbath, like I said, having boundaries. These are all things to incorporate just on a regular basis in our lives. The other thing I wanted to mention is that self-care is not just about doing things that make you feel better. It's about doing things that are good for you. So when I'm going to be talking about these things, don't just expect like, oh, like I feel better right now in the moment. It's like, no, this is a long-term thing. Think about exercise. You may not like it in the moment, but long-term, this is something that's good for you. One thing that's really great is journaling, especially if there's a lot of emotions that are going on. Start journaling. It will give you more self-awareness. It will help you slow down your thoughts and engage your brain in a different way. Learn to be present. It's far easier to sit with negative emotions than it is with positive emotions. So being present is meaning that you notice what's going on around you right now. So getting off your phone, actually being present in the moment. What is happening? What is happening in my body? What's happening around me? Noticing little moments of joy. I can't speak about this one enough. Gratitude. When we train and when we practice gratitude, we actually train our body to sit with joy, to sit longer with joy, because all of us, I can guarantee, if we were raised in Western culture, I can guarantee our ability to sit with joy is very small. You know, in order to actually expand our ability to sit with joy a little bit longer, practice gratitude. Write down what you're grateful for. Notice what you're grateful for. It will literally change your brain. And there's lots of research on that. This one is an interesting one, avoidance. So the more that we avoid something, the more anxiety we actually have about it. So if you look at the first exposure, you know, avoiding it actually, if you avoid it, you have a lot more anxiety the second time around. But if you actually lean into whatever it is you're scared of or nervous about, you have way less anxiety. So learning to lean into what's difficult and hard for us. Take a breath. Even just right now, taking a breath. What taking a breath does is it resets our nervous system. You know, that fight or flight mode, the parasympathetic nervous system versus the sympathetic nervous system. Breathing actually turns on our parasympathetic nervous system. It helps our body to relax. So there's a reason why people say, okay, take a deep breath, because you're trying to engage your body to actually slow down. Okay, exercise. Can't go anywhere without saying this. Exercise is so important to our emotional, mental health, well-being, all those things. Question is how much? This is what the research says. 3 times a week, at least 30 minutes long, and you need to break a sweat. This is like what the 3 criteria that are needed in order for exercise to really be effective in reducing your stress. So you can't take those 30 minutes 3 times a week and make it into a 90-minute session once a week. It needs to be 3 times a week, and you do need to break a sweat. Also, our relationship with our body, learning to be aware of what's going on and helping ourselves to actually exercise, take care of our body, all of those things. There's also different ways that we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And again, that's the part of our nervous system that is responsible for our resting and our digesting and our relaxing. Different things that can be done. Deep breathing, like I was talking about, being present and aware of the sensations in your body, relaxing your muscles through a hot bath, massage, foam rolling, and stretching. Those are all ways that your PNS, parasympathetic nervous system, actually gets activated. Finally, I can't go without saying this. Try out counseling if that is something that's available to you. It is such a huge, huge resource and tool that can be so helpful, especially during this time. I have like a list of some things what to look for in a counselor. We don't really have time to go through that, but if you need, you can ask me and I'll give you some tools there. Community. We cannot, all of these things, all of these self-care things are great, but if we don't have good relationships and good connections with other people, they're not going to be worth all that much. We need people around us who are supportive. We need to be in healthy relationships with people. So surround yourself with people like that. And finally, play. Play, I think, is one of the most important things, is learning how to play. And people think that playing is just for adults or for kids, but it's actually developmentally really important for kids, but also for adults. It helps our brain to go back to that PNS that we were talking about. It helps us to relax, and it actually opens up a wealth of creativity. It opens up a lot of rest for us. So don't neglect play. Anyways, I kind of ran through that very quickly and just kind of felt like a little bit of a marathon. So if you have questions or if you have things that you want to talk to me about, you can connect with me. I run an Instagram channel called wholehearted.growth, and where I share just like mental health tips, emotional wellness tips. Be sure to like contact me through there if you have questions. I can't give any therapy advice or help in personal situations, but if you need help in terms of resources or educational things, certainly something you can contact me for. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you for caring about your own emotional health and well-being. And I hope that 2021 is better for us all.
Thank you so much. I took a lot of notes. Thank you so much for taking the time with us this Sabbath and presenting that to us. For those of you who want to, again, she put her Instagram handle up there, and it's wholehearted on Instagram. So connect with her. But before we do and go, we have some questions if you don't mind answering. And so we're just, I guess my first question would be, like, why is therapy so important? Would you be able to answer that for us?
Yeah, I think therapy is really important because most of us, when we're raised as children, we are not taught about our emotions, and we're not taught about how to take care of our health, our emotional health. Because of that, I think therapy is one of the things that helps us to learn how to take care of ourselves emotionally. And it helps us to understand our relationship with our emotions in ways that we haven't when we were growing up.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I had one question that I was wondering when you were talking, and it's just, how do I know when it is time to seek help?
Yeah, I think there's maybe more acute times of, like, obviously when there are things that are happening, like you're harming yourself or you're thinking about harming yourself or other people. Those would be times where definitely professional help would be necessary. But I also think that behind that question, there's also this assumption that something big has to happen in order for me to go to counseling. But that's not the case at all. I think of counseling as almost like a tune-up, or something that's really good for us, even when there is no crisis, for us to learn about ourselves, for us to learn about who we are, and just to like take care of ourselves. So in some ways, it's like therapy is really helpful anytime. But if you're talking about how do you know when to seek therapy, it could be when you're having trouble just dealing, coping, when there are things going on that you need support in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. Thank you again for your wealth of information, right? You have given us so many cons as to what the pandemic has brought upon us. Have you seen any pros out there? Has anyone come to you with the pluses of this pandemic? you have to share for us?
That's such a good question. I think there's a number of different things, right? One of the things is we realize what we have when we lose it. And a lot of us, I think anyways, a lot of us have started to be more keenly aware of just how many things we take for granted, being together in church, right? Like something never thought about before, or being able to go out to eat, seeing your friends and family, being able to travel, having the freedom to travel. Things that we just always took for granted, now all of a sudden it's like we value them a lot more. So I think that's definitely just something that's come to the forefront of our minds.
I have another question because you spoke, I think one of the very first things is how, being alone is not healthy. And you talked about just in Genesis. And how do we kind of go around or go about not being able to see our friends? Because like I'm very social, you guys are too. And I think it's huge, like I don't even know how to explain this, but it's awful because we're
Mhm.
so used to being social, and now it's like we have to use our phones or
Yeah.
be on Zoom like this. And I know that back in October, I think that after the summer kind of went and we were still able to like be outside and there was more, the days were longer, so it seemed okay. And then school started back out and then it started getting cold in October. And I remember October was just a really dark month for me. I just don't know. It was awful and not being, and then the phases kept closing and we weren't able to see many more people again. How do you have, like, I know we took some coping or like strategies to put in place, but not seeing friends is definitely a huge part. So how do we kind of put that in a better way, or what do we do to cope with it?
Yeah. I think there's no perfect answer for this because literally we're in a situation worldwide where being in person is literally endangering everybody else. So as much as we can, obviously being online, and that has its limitations. It's not going to feel the same as being in person. But I think one of the things that I really took away from the early stages of the pandemic is being intentional about our social connections. So before, when life was normal, we kind of had social connections built into our life, right? We would go to church, we would go, to the gym, we would go to these places, we would go to work, and we had that social connection. Like we didn't have to think too much about it. We would just go for dinner or whatever. But now we don't have any of that, and it just kind of like dropped off the earth. So now I think what's so important is for us to be intentional about like, all right, I need to schedule time with people. I need to do that. And that's what I need to do for myself. So if there's ways that, you can be creative and do it distancing in person, awesome, more power to you. If there isn't, then that's just the situation that we're in. And we have to make the best of it, right? Doing like a games night on Zoom or like having a birthday party on Zoom or whatever it may be. It's kind of like imperfect solutions, but we got to do what we can.
Yeah, Nina, I know that therapy is something that you've studied for like a long time and it's your career. And I saw in the earlier parts of your presentation, you brought up a Bible verse. And I was wondering, like, when you like look into the Bible and try and connect therapy with the biblical aspect, have you ever seen any examples of therapy like inside the Bible and like Bible stories with any people in the Bible? Could you share with us any examples of therapy in the Bible?
Yeah, I think there's so many principles of just like psychology principles and therapy principles throughout the Bible. Like I said, I don't think that we were taught enough about our own emotions and how to relate to our emotions and our mental health as children. But when you look at the Bible, you can see it everywhere. So, one example that I always come back to is in therapy, we have this principle of learning to sit with uncomfortable feelings. Instead of avoiding them by like watching Netflix and binging on that, learning to just sit with whatever's uncomfortable, right? And all of our problems in our life are literally about avoiding uncomfortable feelings. If we are a student and all we do is procrastinate, it's because, not because we're lazy, but it's because we can't sit with the discomfort of starting a presentation or starting this essay that we feel overwhelmed by it. So we run away. So much of our life would be different if we learned to sit with uncomfortable feelings. I look at this story in the Bible of Eli, and he was this priest. He was the high priest, and his sons were wreaking havoc in the temple, right? They were doing ungodly things. They were doing things that were wrong. And God had spoken to Eli and said, like, you need to figure this out. You need to like chastise your children. You need to get them out of here. Like, they cannot be defiling my name like that. But for Eli, and Ellen White talks about this, for Eli, the thought of having a confrontation with his sons and correcting them, it was so much, it was too much for him. So he just avoided that conversation altogether. Kind of something that we all do, right? Just avoided that conversation and didn't like go anywhere with it. And look at the results. Eli was struck dead by God. The sons were struck dead as well. And the name, like the example that was set by these priests was completely awful for Israel. So if Eli had learned to sit with his uncomfortable emotions instead of running away, if he had sat with them a little bit, he would have found the strength to be able to go and have the uncomfortable conversation. But because he couldn't even sit with the uncomfortable conversation, uncomfortable feelings, he just avoided it. And there are the results.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nina. Another question that I have for you. We're in a time of a lot time on our hand, but yet still we seem to get nothing done. Right? We're busy doing nothing, basically. What recommendations do you have in regards to time management?
So that's an interesting question. I actually, what I think is more important is in this time to kind of become curious about our own relationship with productivity. When we have this expectation of ourselves that, oh, pandemic, lockdown, I'm home all the time, I should be getting stuff done, it says more about our need to produce things than anything else, right? It says that, like, is my worth found in doing stuff? Is my worth found in like being productive, a productive human being? That's a very Western value. And yeah, so I think for me, what's more important is looking at what is our relationship with productivity and seeing the context of what's happening right now. We're in a global pandemic where we are learning to survive a pandemic. That's literally what we're doing. And if we are not productive or, getting things done, maybe that's okay too. Maybe that just getting by is good enough. That's how I look at it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's very. I've never thought about that way, so that's very like mind-blowing.
Yeah, for sure. I thought being productive was the best thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
You should always be productive. This is a personal one for me though. How do we relate to our parents or guardians? Like for example, I have this example where I wanted to stop work for a while, right? I wanted to just focus on studying, right? And then I relayed this to my family, to my parents, and their response was like, why do you need to stop work, right? You need to work and go to school. We did it. You could be able to do it. And we did it with so much more responsibility than what you have now, right? So there's always this generational gap that we have. How do you communicate with them, letting them know that my mental strength probably be way less than your mental strength, and probably they were forced to do these things, right? So how do I relate to them in a very respectful way that they see my point of view and also respect your point of view as well?
Yeah, that's such a hard situation, right? Because our parents mean so well for us and they have such a huge influence on our lives, and we want to be respectful, we want to honor them. I think where it starts is knowing for yourself, and knowing your own capacity. Ellen White actually talks about this, and she says that and she says this in relation to students. She says that every student needs to know their own capacity and needs to know how much they can handle. And capacity is something that is so individual and so different for different people. And it's actually wrong for us to operate outside of what we're capable or outside of our capacity. So for some students, being part-time, like working part-time and going to school full-time, totally within their capacity. No issues, no problem. For other people, they can't take a full course load at all. And that's within their capacity, right? So for me, for example, as an undergrad, I didn't take a full course load. I took, instead of 5 courses, I usually took 4. And that was, for me, that was enough. And that was within my capacity. There's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with you for it. It just is. So knowing your capacity, I would say, is the most important thing, because if you know your capacity and you know that it's too much for you to be able to do both, start with that. Know for yourself what you can and can't handle. And this is where boundaries come in, when you have this conversation with parents or people in your life who care about you, is explaining that as much as you can. But you can't change their minds if they think that, you know, that you should be working or whatever. Stick to your boundaries. Stick to what you know is better, what's going to work for you. And you don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to be rude about it. But it's like, I appreciate your concern for me, and I appreciate how much you've done for me. I appreciate that you've been able to do so much. I just can't handle this load. Sometimes you have to write that stuff down, practice it in the mirror before you even have that conversation.
Yeah, so another question that we have for you, many times when people say that they're going for therapy, right off the bat, we think that it's mental therapy. We don't think of physical therapy, because we do have physical therapy, right? So there's always this stigma, this bad stigma in regards to going for therapy, that something is wrong mentally, and if something is wrong mentally, then you're unstable, and then you're
insane or something.
You're a crazy person, right? Nina, what advice do you have to give to someone who wants to seek therapy but is fighting against that stigma?
Yeah, you know, it's a really hard one, because there's still so much stigma. Even though it's 2021, we've come a long way, and yet there is still a lot of stigma. So one of them is, I think, starting to have like a change inside of ourselves in terms of how we see counseling and therapy. So I think of it this way: if you were to get a personal trainer, right? Nobody would bat an eye and think, oh, you weakling, you need a personal trainer, right? Like, people would be like, wow, you're getting your goals. Good for you. Have at her. You know, nobody looks at somebody who goes to therapy and thinks, wow, like, you're actually taking steps to take responsibility for your life, to take ownership, to grow as a person. Good for you. Nobody does that. But in reality, that's what it is. When you start to seek therapy, you show an emotional maturity about you that is saying, I understand that this is an important part of my life, and I want to grow in that area. And this is how I'm going to do it. So I think changing our own relationship with therapy is really important, because you're never going to change everybody else's mind. There's always going to be people who, you know, have stigma, who talk down about it, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, if you know that this is what's best for you, then have at her. I go to therapy very regularly. I'm a therapist. I have no shame in saying that or telling people that, because it's such an important part of my life, and it's how I take care of myself.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nina. And also for therapists, just having that someone to speak to where you know that your information and what you have shared is going to be confidential, right? That set of professional help that we need also too. So thank you so much, Nina. Thank you so much, Olivia and Nasha, for being here, for closing off our youth week of prayer stretch. Then we're still holding on. We are so happy that everyone is still watching, and we were able to also provide answers to the many questions that we do have.
Well, thank you for having me.
So yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to say, like, my biggest takeaway from this was definitely the points of the coping and the strategies that you've given us. That was really, really good for me. So thank you.
Thank you for coming in. And I'd say my biggest takeaway was just how you were able to relate our therapy, things that we're doing now, to stuff that actually in the Bible, and how people in the Bible needed therapy, how that story about Eli, and how we need to just sit with I forgot what we used to, our problems or our challenges. We need to just sit with them and just face them instead of just procrastinating, putting them off, which is a tendency that a lot of us usually just tend to do these days.
Oh yeah, and for me, it's just what you said about productivity. We always think that we need to be productive, but sometimes it's just okay to relax.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Nina's Instagram handle is wholehearted at growth. That's it, right? Wholehearted.growth.
Yes.
I got it correct? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and before we all go, I'd just like to close with a quick word of prayer. So if we go, just bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for allowing us all to come here, and thank you for allowing us to be able to put on this stretch thin week of youth prayer and youth ministry that Pastor Asha and the rest of the administrative pastors put together in the church. Thank you for Nina for being able to come in here to share with us the knowledge of therapy and how it connects to the Bible and why it's important in this pandemic that we're going through and the struggles that many different people face. Lord, we want to just pray for those that couldn't be here today, couldn't be with us because of the pandemic. Please help them all to be able to have been able to take something from this session that we did and be able to just manage themselves and manage their time and know when it's time to seek help, so that when this is all said and done, we can all come back and meet together as a church family, and we'll all be physically and mentally healthy, and just help us all as we are going our separate ways home. Help us all to have safe journeys home, and just prepare on for the week that's coming ahead. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Thank you so much for that, Nisha.
Thank you, everyone.
Nina, take care. Stay safe.
Bye. Good to meet you all.
That you do.
Yeah.